From each according to his ability, to each according to their needs. I can't lie, it's catchy. The more I go online, the more it seems like Marxism is making a comeback. And I don't mean it in the Bernie Sanders is a communist sense. I mean actual Marxism. Seizing the means of production, dictatorship of the proletariat, yada yada yada. I mean, taking a short look at Twitter, or Reddit, or Twitch.
Kill those motherfuckers in a video game, sorry. Holy murder those motherfuckers in the street. Let the streets soak in their red capitalist bloods, dude.
You can see on the last 5 years the Overton window's really shifted. And I'm all for it. But there's just one little problem. Marxism is kinda useless. I know. You're probably thinking I'm going to talk about how Marxism just leads to suffering or totalitarianism. But the critique I'd like to present in this video is not that communism is unachievable or that it will only bring suffering. It goes deeper than that, to the core of orthodox Marxism, the labor theory of value, and how it's unfalsifiable, unscientific, and ultimately useless. But before I get into why I say that, let's explain what Marxism is and outline why typical critiques of it usually get it wrong. The labor theory of value postulates that, quote, we see then that which determines the magnitude of value of any article is the amount of labor socially necessary for its production. Put simply, to Marx, human labor is responsible for value. On its surface, a critique of the labor theory of value would be, well, if I spent 500 hours making a mud pie, the mud pie will still be worthless. And to be honest, that's more so a misunderstanding of Marx than an actual critique of his theory. At the beginning of Capital, Marx directly states that, quote, lastly, nothing can have value without being an object of utility. If the thing is useless, so is the labor contained in it. The labor does not count as labor and therefore creates no value. Marx separates value into two categories: use value, the utility of the object, and the exchange value, what I can exchange it for. You cannot have an exchange value without a use value, and the exchange value is based on how much socially necessary labor time went into creating the commodity. By socially necessary labor time, he means necessary time in a given society to make something, based on average conditions of production, technology, skill, etc. Another common critique is that value has to be subjective because without individuals, there is no such thing as value. However, I think that's more an issue of definition than incoherence. When Marxists, and some heterodox economists, say value is objective, they mean it in a social sense. They don't mean that value could exist without individuals. They just mean that value can be determined and predicted by societal factors outside of pure subjective preference. Putting it all together, let's use an analogy. Imagine you have 3 bakers. One bakes mud pies for fun. They can't feed you, which means you won't buy them no matter what. They have no value. Another baker bakes 1 pie every 2 hours, but in your town, most bakers only take 1 hour to bake 1 pie, which means the baker who took 2 hours will price it as if it only took 1 hour to stay competitive. But since he spent extra time, he will be losing profit compared to others, hurting his bottom line and potentially going bankrupt. The last baker is skilled and can make a pie in half an hour, which is faster than most bakeries, but he prices it as if it only takes 1 hour, because most bakeries around him take an hour. Since it costs him less time, he gets to pocket the time and money he saves as profit. So what's the problem? I mean, it does seem to make sense at first glance. Well, one big critique I could make is that human labor is arbitrary. Let's look at Marx's equation regarding the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. You see, from a Marxist perspective, machinery cannot produce value. It can only transfer it. Therefore, as mechanization increases, the rate of profit tends to fall, all else being equal. However, Marx would respond that there are counter-tendencies the capitalist can take to prevent this from happening. Foreign trade/market expansion, lowering input costs, more worker exploitation, cheapened capital goods, accelerating turnover of capital, or a crisis that can reset everything. Now, I could go through and argue the individual knobs and levers Marx can use to weasel out of this, but that's likely to be pointless and boring, which leads to the core of my critique. The point I'm trying to make with this video is that the LTV, and by extension orthodox Marxism, are useless as a theory. Let's look at the equation again. If the rate of profit declines, then the Marxists can argue their theory is correct. However, if the rate of profit stays the same or increases after mechanization, they can turn one of those easily adjustable knobs to fit their theory, ex post facto. A model that can predict anything after the fact can predict nothing before the fact. This is the biggest problem with Marxism and why it's so hard to argue against, because it's fundamentally unfalsifiable. From a predictive and scientific standpoint, the LTV is redundant. We can already determine relative prices and the profit rate once we know technology, wages, or markups, without including labor values. Now, is there any way we could actually put Marxist theory to the test? Could the Marxist actually show whether the TRPF and the LTV are true? Well, let me propose an experiment. First, take a random time period of history before locking in any numbers. The point is, you can't cherry pick. Second, we lock in the metrics we want to predict before touching the data. This prevents the Marxist from changing any of their knobs or levers after the fact to fit their theory. Lastly, look at whether or not the TRPF holds. Do it a dozen or so times and we can determine whether the TRPF holds consistently or not. Would any Marxist be able to do this? Probably not, at least without invoking something other than the LTV or the TRPF. The number of variables they need to predict and lock in makes it incredibly difficult to do, and the data seems to be inconsistent with the scholarship regarding it being disputed at best. I mean, even Marxist sympathetic economists seem to be unsure of its empirical validity. I already know in the comments there will be many critiques people will throw at me, so let's anticipate a few of them and respond. You're attacking a straw man! Marx never said prices equal labor time! Yes, and I'm also using Marx's own caveats. Prices deviate from labor values, and profits equalize into prices of production. My point is that as a predictive and scientific theory, LTV, and by extension orthodox Marxism, adds pretty much nothing once we know technology, wages, and markups. It's useless and redundant. Empirically, prices correlate strongly with labor values. Same with capital and energy costs. Correlation doesn't mean causation. I could easily make a far more robust argument that energy usage, not labor, is a driver of value, but then it wouldn't be Marxism. LTV isn't for prediction. It's a critical theory about exploitation. It's inextricably connected. If the labor theory of value is unfalsifiable and unscientific, then surplus value, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, and the constant variable labor split all collapse. Orthodox Marxism's economic core cannot exist without the LTV being true and observable. Admitting the LTV is unfalsifiable and unscientific while calling yourself a Marxist is like calling yourself a Newtonian while believing you can't show gravity exists. That's just LARPing. If a theory cannot be wrong and makes no predictable forecasts, that doesn't show you that it's correct. It just shows you that it's useless and unscientific. If you want to hold that it's true privately, that's fine, but then it's not a scientific belief, it's a religious belief. In the words of Karl Popper, a theory which is not refutable by any conceivable event is non-scientific. Irrefutability is not a virtue of a theory, but a vice. If you made it to the end of the video, I just want to say thank you. This is my first video ever, so it really means a lot. This video took a while to make, so if you enjoyed it, please feel free to like or share the video. I still don't know exactly what I want this channel to be, so the following video might be a bit different from this one, or maybe not. We'll see. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.